brightening skies, some sunshine coming through, but further showers for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, and these showers falling as snow over the hills. Feeling cold in the north, 5 or 6 Celsius for Scotland, 10 or 11 Celsius in the far south. Clearing skies very briefly this evening, and then overnight the next batch of wind and rain moves in from the west. A damp night for most. The far north of Scotland staying clear of the rain, and here a touch of frost is possible, 0 degrees for the likes of Aberdeen and Stornoway, but further south 8s, 9s for Cardiff, London, Southampton, but a damp and increasingly windy start to the day tomorrow. Gales are on exposed coasts in the south, but increasingly as the first area of rain moves away and the next batch of wet weather moves in for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern and Western England and Wales by the afternoon, attention as far as the winds are concerned moves north. And Storm Dudley by this stage is starting to approach Scotland, and as a result, well, it's across northern parts of the UK where widespread gales are expected overnight into Wednesday and Thursday. And risk of damaging or disruptive winds, especially for central and southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. An amber warning is in force.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 9:30 this Tuesday morning, and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and on your radio. Today, energy crisis, Ukraine crisis, Scottish independence inconsistencies, and why is Mauritius trying to seize British territory? All that and so much more on today's show, but first, it's your morning headlines.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:32. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, the Russian Defence Ministry says it's returning some troops from the Ukrainian border. That is according to local media. The Russian news agency Interfax is also reporting, though, that the military is continuing exercises in a number of other areas. Well, this development follows a meeting between Boris Johnson and President Biden last night, when they said there is still time for a diplomatic solution to avert war. The number of UK workers in formal employment rose again at the beginning of this year. The Office for National Statistics said the number of UK workers in formal employment climbed by 108,000 between December and January. Salaries rose in the last quarter of the year, but continued to lag behind inflation, which is at a near 30-year high. The tennis star Novak Djokovic says he won't defend his Wimbledon or French Open titles if the tournaments require mandatory vaccination for competitors. Speaking to the BBC, he said it was a price he was willing to pay and that he prioritised decision-making on his body over a trophy. Northern Ireland's remaining coronavirus restrictions will be lifted and replaced instead by guidance today. The rules requiring face masks in public places and the need to show COVID certificates for nightclubs will be dropped. The country's health minister will make an order revoking the rules later on today. People in Wales will receive extra support to help manage the cost of living crisis. The Welsh Government says they're going above and beyond, offering a package including a £150 cost of living payment and an extra £200 for low-income households next winter. One of the developers of the Oxford AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine will collect her damehood today. Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert will receive the honour at Windsor Castle for her services to science and public health. You're now up to date here on GB News, but on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Now let's head back to Tom for this morning's briefing.
Good morning, it is 9:34 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and on your radio. Now, against the backdrop of the energy crisis and inflation in general, petrol and diesel prices are soaring too to record highs. Over the weekend, petrol reached 148p a litre, while diesel hit a new record high of 152p a litre last Thursday. This amid a counterproductive policy tug-of-war, pulling at our energy strategy, pulling it apart and tearing away at any hope of stable energy supplies for the UK. So what should we be aiming for as a country? What kind of energy mix should we be fostering? Undoubtedly, the climate is important, but so too is the pound in our pockets. What should a 21st century British energy policy look like in order to deliver an energy mix that works for consumers? Well, let's discuss this now with Malcolm Grinston, energy expert and senior research fellow at Imperial College London. Welcome to the programme, Malcolm. First of all, is it inevitable that we're seeing these petrol and diesel price rises given what's going on in the world?
Yes, I mean, to an extent, the oil price and the gas price do largely follow each other, and indeed the coal price globally, because there are some areas where we work where you can move one from one to another. So when the price of one goes up, demand for the other increases, and that pushes its price up in turn. So, for example, we have seen an increase in the use of coal for electricity recently, and that's because of gas getting more expensive, and that's increased the coal price. So I think, unfortunately, it is the case that we're going to see oil prices relatively high. This is still nothing like the levels they were in real terms in the 1970s, but relatively high compared to what we've recently experienced.
You say there that the price of gas can affect the price of petrol, presumably because some power plants can use some forms of energy versus others, and it sort of all intermixes. Therefore, would other areas of generating more energy, could that potentially bring down the petrol and diesel price if we were to, for example, have hydroelectric power, nuclear power, lots more wind power in the UK? Could that actually bring down the price of petrol?
Well, if you look at France, which is still something like 70% nuclear generated, its price increases have been capped at 4%, which is credible because the uranium price, uranium, which is the fuel for nuclear power, the prices have been going up, but it's a much, much smaller proportion of the total cost. A ton of uranium produces about the same amount of energy as 20,000 tons of coal. So uranium costs are about 2 or 3% of the total cost. The main cost is building the plant and maintaining it. So nuclear power certainly acts as a serious hedge against these increases in fossil fuel prices. Hydro has an important role to play in many countries, Scandinavia, parts of the United States, New Zealand, and so on. That doesn't work so well when you have a very dry period. So there have been a couple of occasions over the last decades when New Zealand in particular has pretty much lost all of its power supplies because of problems with keeping the water in the reservoirs up. But that being said, that's relatively rare, and hydro has the great advantage you can switch it on and off very quickly. So it's very good for balancing supply and demand in real term. But this is what happens. This is what we saw in the 70s with the massive oil shocks there. The market responds by investing in alternatives, and ultimately those alternatives bring the price down again, as long as we don't interfere with the market and make it so that the companies can't make money in the short term, which they can then invest, which is
precisely what our politicians have been doing for the last at least 5 years, possibly more. What with the energy price cap that's forced about 24 energy firms out of business because they can't afford to supply underneath that cap, but also now talks of a windfall tax when energy companies make profits, then they won't be able to invest for the future. I mean, are our politicians here making it worse for everyone by meddling too much?
I think that's, you pretty much took the words out of my mouth there. These are long-term investments. To invest in the electricity supply industry or into new gas fields or whatever it is, you don't get your money back in 2 or 3 years. These are often decades before you start seeing a reasonable return on that investment. If we say to the market, invest in these things if you want, but if you do make any money out of it, we're going to take it off you. Then you can get into the worst of all worlds where the price goes up, so we are paying more for our energy, but the companies are scared to invest it, so we don't get the investment in the next generation of equipment. And price caps have the same effect. If you go back to 1997, when the Blair government introduced a windfall tax on the power companies, which had been privatised in the Thatcher years, within 5 years, the electricity supply industry in the UK was bankrupt. The Americans all sold up and went home. Government had to bail out British Energy, which was one of there was the main nuclear company at that time. Not because there was anything wrong with the plants, but because this windfall tax had removed so much money from the system that you weren't getting money going into investment in maintenance of the plants or new generation.
Yeah, well, that has been a really fascinating exploration of what not to do. Hopefully, one day soon we'll find out what we can do, but certainly it's productive to find the errors of our ways. I'm afraid we've run out of time in this conversation, but Malcolm Grinston, energy expert and senior research fellow at Imperial College London, thank you for joining us on the briefing this morning. Now, we're moving on to an issue of foreign policy, but not the one on the front page of most newspapers this morning. The Mauritian flag has been raised over the Chagos Islands, a British Indian Ocean territory. Now, these islands have been subject to a dispute between the UK and Mauritius, one that the UN has seen fit to get involved with a few times. Now, the Foreign Office, for its part, has said that the UK has no doubt as to our sovereignty over the British Indian Ocean territory, which we have held continuously since 1814. Now, it went on to say that Mauritius has never held sovereignty over the territory and the UK does not recognise its claim. However, Mauritius has gone as far as saying that Britain is now occupying the islands illegally. Well, let's talk more about this with Andrew Rossendale, the Conservative MP for Romford and the chairman of the all-party parliamentary group on the Chagos Islands since 2015. Now, welcome to the programme. Andrew, what on earth is going on here? The UK has held these islands since 1814. Why is Mauritius now sailing over there? It's about 1,000 miles away from Mauritius. It might, on the grand global scheme, seem, oh, these two places are in the Pacific, but actually, or in the Indian Ocean, I should say, but actually they're pretty far away from one another. Why is Mauritius doing this now?
Well, I've actually been out to the Chagos Islands 3 years ago to Peros Banos, where the vessel for Mauritius has landed and planted a Mauritian flag. And the Mauritians claim this territory, but of course, we consider it to be a British overseas territory, and therefore the sovereignty rests with the United Kingdom. The Mauritian government have taken the UK government to the UN over this, and the UN have come down on the side of Mauritius. But in truth, this is a mess that we have created. We told the people who lived on those islands that they couldn't live there anymore, and we forcibly removed them in the 60s and 70s. And so we denied them their human rights and their ability to live in their homeland. You remember the Falklands, Tom? We fought a war to give the people of the Falklands the right to stay in their homeland and be British. We did the opposite with the Chagossians. We took them out of their homeland and forced them to either live in the UK or Seychelles or Mauritius. So we're in the wrong over this. However, those islands do not belong to Mauritius. They are British, and any decolonisation of them should be done in a way which is negotiated. But in my view, the people of the Chagos Islands should have the ultimate say. It's their land, it's their territory, and they should have self-determination like every other former British colony.
It's interesting, Mauritius is making an anti-colonialist argument by being colonialists themselves, by going and planting a flag on an island and saying this is ours now, with very little consultation of the people who live there or who used to live there. Now, I think we probably should say the context of this. People did leave the islands or were removed from the islands in the 60s because an American base was being built, an American military base was being built on one of the islands that we leased to the Americans. That base is still there. Would it be practical for people to move back to what is now, in effect, a US military base?
Yes, it would be. And this is where the British government have been very wrong on this, because Diego Garcia is a very important military base. And of course, it's very important that we keep it as such. It is strategically very important to NATO, the US, to us. So no way do we give up on that, but that shouldn't stop people who are from the Chagos Islands living there and working on the base and living on the outer islands. So Peros Banos, which is the island we're talking about, this is a long way from Diego Garcia. I think it's like 160 miles away from the American air base. So I think the people of the Chagos Islands should be allowed to go back under British sovereignty. When they're settled, they should have the right to decide. Either they stay a British overseas territory, or if that's their choice, they could be under Mauritius. But it's not for Mauritius government or the UK government to say to the Chagossian people, you will do as you're told. That's acting like a colonialist, and I'm against that. I want the Chagossian people to determine whether they are under the United Kingdom or whether they go to Mauritius. But what is wrong is that at the moment, the UK government is not allowing those people to go back to their homeland, and I think they should be allowed to go back.
It is interesting when we talk from people in our sort of privileged Western position, we sort of often say that the only kind of imperialists can possibly be people from this part of the world, and that just simply doesn't stand up to any scrutiny of history at all. I do wonder, though, from your position there, is that in line with what the UN has said, or has the UN to some extent gone a little bit too far here, gone a bit further than their mandate?
Yeah, I think the UN is entitled to express an opinion. I think that it's not binding on us. We're not legally bound to vacate the Chagos Islands and hand them back to Mauritius. The vessel that has gone over there, it's a bit of a stunt, to be honest, raising the flag. They can do that if they wish. It doesn't change the fact that those islands are still under British sovereignty, and the UK government isn't giving them away anytime soon. But what the government should be doing is negotiating with all the interested parties to secure the islands and to give the right of return to the Chagossian people. So let's be clear about this, Tom. We are at fault on this. We've created this mess. Labour government in the 70s started this. They forcibly rejected the people, they killed their animals, and they basically took away the rights of the people of those islands. And we should be ashamed of that, and we can put it right by letting the people go back. But the decision must be theirs. It's the Chagossian people that must determine the future of those islands, not Westminster and not Mauritius, nobody else, not the UN. Only the Chagossian people should have the right to determine the future destiny of their islands.
I think that will be a sentiment that is reflected widely, and I suppose it's a point of agreement from everyone that there should be no further meddling from Mauritius in the affairs of the Chagossian people. But for now, Andrew Rossendale, thank you for talking us through that really interesting issue that hasn't got enough media coverage over the last week or so that it should. Andrew Rossendale, thank you. Now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson will chair a Cobra meeting today on the worrying situation in Ukraine. This comes after a phone call with Joe Biden last night, where the leaders agreed to remain in close contact as the crisis unfolds. They agreed there remained a, quote, crucial window for diplomacy. Well, let's talk through this now with former soldier and ex-National Crime Agency officer Mike Tapp. Welcome to the show. First of all, we're hearing tentative reports this morning, although from Kremlin sources, that some Russian troops may be leaving the Ukrainian border. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's interesting, given that they've been there for many months now. But firstly, I think we need to just make it clear that there are no exercises going on here. There may be some drills, but this isn't an exercise. This is a show of aggression from Vladimir Putin. But what this slight drawback might indicate is that the Russians are willing to take diplomacy seriously at this last moment, as we've seen indicated from Moscow. And that's obviously good timing, given that we have Macron, the Germans and the Americans pushing hard at this last minute for a diplomatic solution, which is obviously very important to ensure that people aren't killed.
It is interesting how much the West in general, if we can use that term, has been visiting Russia, whether it's Macron, whether it's the German Chancellor, whether it's our Foreign Secretary, our Defence Secretary, and various phone calls between our Prime Minister and Vladimir Putin as well, and a phone call between our Prime Minister and Joe Biden last night. I wonder, though, there'll be some who say that this kind of diplomacy, that potentially offering concessions to the Russians in response to a show of force, is exactly the wrong thing to do. It's saying that all you need to do if you're a demagogue or dictator around the world is pile up 100,000 plus troops on the border of a neighbouring country, threaten to invade, and then the Western community will give you what you want. Are we in danger of doing that?
Precisely, and we have to look at what Putin is in this for. He's an ex-KGB man. He's calculated, and he'll be looking at either a full Ukrainian occupation, maybe a land corridor into Crimea, NATO concessions, or implementing the Russian interpretation of the Minsk agreement. And if we do give these concessions, then what's next? Are Estonia fair game, and does he start moving on to NATO? So it is important that we stand firm, and we must consider the Ukrainians' point of view on this, especially when it comes to the Minsk agreement.
So what does a diplomatic solution look like then, if we really should not, and I completely agree with you, we should not be pursuing any of these sort of strategic goals for Russia on their behalf, whether it's ceding territory or denying the self-determination right of the Ukrainian people as to whether or not they should choose to join NATO. It should be their choice, not Russia's, not ours. What then does diplomacy look like?
This is where we're going to need our diplomats to be skilled. Unfortunately, we've seen coming out of our government weak diplomacy, failures to speak with Putin on the phone, Liz Truss embarrassing the government in Moscow. But at the end of this, we need to see Putin able to go away with something for the Russian people, whether that's a non-aggression pact, who knows, that's for the diplomats.
Well, it's a certainly interesting developing situation. We'll see whether these reports are corroborated over the next few hours of withdrawing troops. It's a very close one to watch, and no doubt a terrifying moment for many within Ukraine. But for now, Mike Tapp, former soldier and ex-National Crime Agency officer, thank you for joining us on the briefing this morning. Now, the Scottish National Party politicians have in recent months been spreading the line that the remaining UK, in other words, England, Wales and Northern Ireland, would continue to fund state pensions in Scotland after it hypothetically left the UK. Now, this is despite in 2014 the SNP declaring that for those people living in Scotland at the time of independence, the responsibility for the payment of that pension will transfer to the Scottish Government. A completely contradictory position. So what's changed? Could it be that without the billions in oil revenue that the SNP relied upon for their case throughout that 2014 referendum, they're now switching tactic to implausibly claim that the English, Welsh and Northern Irish taxpayers will simply continue to pay for things after the country has been partitioned? Well, let's discuss all of this now and Boris Johnson's recent visit to Scotland with John McTernan, a former advisor to Tony Blair and a political commentator. Welcome to the programme. First of all, on the SNP, with this sort of change in dialogue, this change in messaging from 2014. Instead of saying Scotland is a wealthy country, as an independent country, we could fund all of this stuff ourselves, they're now saying we'd get England, Wales and Northern Ireland to fund pensions. Is that credible?
No, it's just a lie. It's a big lie, and it's an attempt to persuade voters that the massive transfer from the UK to Scotland, the fiscal transfer of around £15 billion a year, that won't be lost. And why won't it be lost? Well, because pensions will be paid for anyway by the English, and that'll be fine.
I don't think so. And I think if you look at the attitude of the Scottish government, it's been...
Let's get back to John McTernan. Sorry, John, you were saying.
Yeah, sorry, that was a great segue. I was saying, look, it's clear the nationalists can't work out how to answer the question: how can Scotland lose £15 billion a year of a fiscal transfer from the rest of the UK without massive cuts? Because £15 billion a year more is spent on public services in Scotland is raised in taxation. They can't fill it with oil revenues because the oil is now running out. And anyway, the SNP are committed to keeping oil and gas in the North Sea because they're into net zero faster than the rest of the UK.
Is the worry here, though, John, is the worry here that this is a conversation that the SNP would like unionists to be having? It almost belittles Scotland to say that Scotland relies upon the English taxpayer, that without the English taxpayer, Scotland couldn't do it itself. Are we playing their game a little bit there by simply talking about fiscal transfer rather than the emotional connection to being one country that so many people ought to feel?
No, look, I don't think so, because after a certain point, facts are so big they can't be denied. And the SNP attempt is to go, it's all about heart, it's not about head. Seriously, £15 billion, that's the size of the funding of the whole of the NHS in Scotland. It's a lot of money. Of course, Scotland could be independent. It's just it couldn't have public services at the same level that it has at the moment without massive hikes in taxation and massive hikes in borrowing.
Well, we've only got a minute left on this interview, John, so I do want to quickly get on to free ports because, of course, Boris Johnson was in Scotland yesterday announcing green free ports. Is this something that is showing an amelioration of relations between the SNP and the British government, or is there still a lot of tension there?
It shows you that the new Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes, is kind of conservative inclined. She's actually quite happy to do deals with the Tories because she is herself one of those tartan Tories in the SNP. And the SNP are always happy to get other people's money. That's what their position on pensions is. That's their position on free ports.
Well, John McTernan, thank you there for that neat analysis. It brings us to the end of the programme and the end of the interview. So thank you for joining us there on The Briefing. That's all we have time for. Coming up, it's To The Point with Mercy Moroki and Patrick Christys. Yes, he's back from holiday, so stick around for that. But first, it's the weather.
Hello, very good morning to you. A damp start out there this morning. Rain at times through the rest of the day, but eventually clearing away, albeit lingering in the south, and then a stormy rest of the week as the jet stream, powerful current of winds high in the atmosphere, picks up and spins up a number of storms. Storm Dudley coming through Wednesday night, Storm Eunice Friday, so it's the northern half of the UK with Storm Dudley that will be worst affected by the wind, and then the southern half affected by Storm Eunice on Friday. Pay close attention to Met Office weather warnings and forecasts. At first this morning, outbreaks of rain pushing into southern parts of the country and lingering for a time this afternoon with a strong breeze around the coast. It is going to feel unpleasant here. Elsewhere, brightening skies, some sunshine coming through, but further showers for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, and these showers falling as snow over the hills. Feeling cold in the north, 5 or 6 Celsius for Scotland, 10 or 11 Celsius in the far south. Clearing skies very briefly this evening And then overnight, the next batch of wind and rain moves in from the west. A damp night for most. The far north of Scotland staying clear of the rain. And here, a touch of frost is possible. 0 degrees for the likes of Aberdeen and Stornoway. But further south, 8s, 9s for Cardiff, London, Southampton. But a damp and increasingly windy start to the day tomorrow. Gales are on exposed coasts in the south. But increasingly, as the first area of rain moves away and the next batch of wet weather moves in for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern and Western England and Wales by the afternoon, attention as far as the winds are concerned moves north. And Storm Dudley by this stage is starting to approach Scotland, and as a result, well, it's across northern parts of the UK where widespread gales are expected overnight into Wednesday and Thursday. And risk of damaging or disruptive winds, especially for central and southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England.